Exalted is an anime fantasy game that also uses elements of the classical world and classical legend. Exalted is Elric meets Princess Mononoke. It's Ninja Scroll meets the Iliad. It's a combination of high fantasy, pulp fantasy, and anime fantasy. Characters take the role of the Solar Exalted, heroes of a bygone age whose position was usurped, who were locked away in stasis for thousands of years, and who have now returned to the world, maybe to set it right, maybe to wreck it. The Solar Exalted are divided into 5 castes based on the 5 positions of the sun. The Dawn caste are the warriors and generals of the Solar Exalted. They bring the light of the sun into dark places. They're heroes, and they're so fearsome to look at when they're in battle that unless you're very strong-willed, you have to fight them with your face turned away. The Zenith caste are the emissaries of righteousness. They're the representatives of the unconquered sun, the deity who has always looked out for the Solar Exalted, and they're here in the world to, make it a better place. The Twilight caste are magicians. They're sorcerers, but they're also people who go and do in the world. They're engineers and builders, not just guys who sit in towers with long white beards. The Night caste are spies and assassins. They're the eyes of the Solar Exalted when the sun hides his face. They go out into the world and see what's happening where maybe they shouldn't look. The Eclipse caste are the diplomats of the Solar Exalted, and not in the sense that they go out and compromise. They can walk among spirits and the fair folk and other kinds of exalted safely, learn their powers, and then eventually, if they need to, turn them back against them. Solar Exalted are suddenly granted these demigod-like powers, and what do they do with them? Do they just become some corrupt god king? Do they become heroes? Do they try to remake the world? Do they try to bring about the Golden Age? Do they ally themselves with the Empire? As player characters, these are the kind of things that you are going to have to choose. The emotional end of Exalted, for the characters, it's pretty rough. They've just been turned into epic heroes, and now they've had this immense power thrust upon them, and at the same time they have this power thrust upon them, they're also labeled as demons by the predominant religion of the world. There's spiritual beings all over the place telling them, oh, you're the heroes returned, and at the same time there's people chasing them around trying to burn them at the stake because there's some kind of anathema. All of the major supernaturals in the world of darkness are present in Exalted. There is the Solars, who are very similar to the Hunters. There's the Lunar Exalted, obviously sort of the thing that the Garou are going to spring from. There's the Dragon-blooded, clearly the predecessors to the Kindred of the East. There's the Sidereals, who in some way or another are eventually going to turn into what mages refer to as avatars. And then there's the Abyssal Exalted, who have some kind of misty connection to the Curse of Cain that's never really explained. Exalted is, in a lot of ways, much lighter-hearted than other World of Darkness games. Like Vampire, Werewolf, they all take place in a world on the brink of apocalypse. It's not going to be there in 50 years. On the other hand, Exalted takes place in a world that is definitely on the brink of something. It could be an age of chaos. It could be a new golden age. The real question is, what are you going to make it?
Exalted's been in the works for, I'd say, really about 3 years, from the initial concept of doing it to through the full execution of it. The original inspiration for Exalted was really out of a desire for a lot of the creative people at White Wolf to do a truly epic, fantastic game. And when we looked around at the possibilities, most compelling to us was to take a lot of the archetypes that we'd established through the World of Darkness games and imagine what they would be like in an epic fantasy setting. Another reason we were looking to do Exalted in the first place was because White Wolf had not done a fantasy game to speak of. And we really were just waiting to get the right synthesis of an idea that we felt was compelling enough that warranted doing a storytelling game in the fantasy genre. I think the big reason that we looked at an anime feel for the Exalted game was there's so many influences coming into the world now, creative influences, embodying this anime look and style. And a lot of the creative team that were involved with Exalted, including myself, were really captivated by this. Final Fantasy, Ninja Scroll, the explosion of all the types of anime movies that are available worldwide now, had an impact on us. And also to do a fantasy game in the anime style is something that had not been done before yet in storytelling games or role-playing games. And we felt like this was something that's going to differentiate it from the modern day World of Darkness games, as well as any other fantasy role-playing game that's out there, and give other people who are anime fans an opportunity to look at the medium of storytelling games.
Exalted really benefits from the many years of experience that we've had putting out new games and new game worlds, in that we've got a pretty good system set up for how a game is actually designed and put together. You have your initial conceptual meetings, which are pretty much attended by anyone at White Wolf who's interested in that game. Later, people will then break off into groups. In the case of Exalted, very quickly it was necessary, because the visuals were so important, to break off a visual design, conceptual design group to work with the writers and developers along, throw ideas back and forth, but basically continually produce images to go with their writing. Eventually you get to a point where the developer has gotten all the information he needs to get to set up the world, and he creates a writer's Bible, and then gets that out to his various writers that he's hired. That, at the same time, we're working with trying to get things together for the artists. When you do a new world like Exalted, you really need to have an art Bible ready for the freelance artists to do their illustrations from, that basically will describe the world, in this case the world of Exalted, illustrate any signature characters ahead of time so that everyone can be consistent with what they look like, and show the artifacts, show the architecture, show what people wear in this new world. We created the art Bible based on the sketches of myself, Josh Timbrook, and Jeff Holt, who were the original conceptual visual design team. And that art Bible then is assembled. It was about 120, 150 pages, which was pretty big, and then given to the freelance illustrators who then worked from that to keep a consistent look for the entire Exalted world.
I'm usually brought in early on in a project to help with the conceptual design, that being character design and atmosphere, or that sort of thing. Often the look of things changes as the product evolves, but in this case I ended up being sort of lumped into the abyssal category, working on those dark, tragic characters. You tell me why. I think my character designs gave the other artists a nice springboard in a lot of cases. My design in terms of the armor of the fantasy characters and their basic gear, clothing, was helpful to get everybody going.
Sellers were actually kind of difficult to come up with, in that at first glance they can be very much the I'm a paladin and I run around and I save people. They're the good guys, and they're devoted to the sun, and the sun is their symbol and gold is their color. And what we wanted to really do was present the fact that these are not superhuman demigod Hercules types, but very much the woodsman out in the woods that suddenly has to defend his village and has these powers thrust upon him that he never knew that he had. And so visually we approached it as, while there are elements that are magical armor and magical weapons that only they can use, made of this gold material, yet they're still wearing tattered pants, and they've still got scars on their bodies from their years of working in the fields and things of that nature. So they're a rough group, and we tried to bring that across visually. I created the calligraphic script and the languages of Exalted based on two sort of design requirements. The first one was that the first age script would be cruder. We'd already sort of gone with sort of a Mesoamerican look for the first age, the golden age of the Exalted, and so we basically based that on Mayan syllable script, and then to take that and go into a more calligraphic, almost kanji sort of script form based on the original Mayan was where I created the second age script, which is also syllable based, but is quite different.
This is also a time in the process when many other graphic elements are created. Logos, borders, symbols, maps, and other designs that flesh out the look of the world. Many of these elements are created almost entirely electronically. This process is usually done in layers so that the artist can control the project from start to finish. The artist usually begins by scanning in a piece of line art. He then adds color to bring the piece to life, followed by towns, cities, and other landmarks, and finally, graphic flourishes to finish the piece.
When the writers are done writing, everything then comes back in-house, and we actually start trying to get the art for the book at that time. In general, we give our artists anywhere from a month to a month and a half to go through a sketch phase and then get us the final art. Ideally, the text comes out of editing and goes into production to be laid out at the same time that the art's coming in from the illustrators. Everything is knocked together then by production, graphic design, and the book is sent off to the printers.
One of the things that I like best about Exalted is the move names, which I have to say weren't initially mine. I had been very conservative when I named things, and then when I turned the manuscript into review, Steve had called me into his office. I thought I was, being called onto the carpet for something I had done in terms of the design. And then he said, no, these need kung fu, these need kung fu move names. And oh, okay. I had tried to avoid that kind of thing. And so I went back and I had to change all of extra health levels turned into ox body technique, which I think adds a great deal to the game and is probably, something that Steve added to it that I would never have put in myself. One of the elements that was left out of Exalted was autothonia. Autothonia, the sort of mechanical god world, was a really important part of the initial Bible, and there just wasn't space to do it properly. We have some stuff that's going to be covering it coming up in the next year or so, but originally it was supposed to be a big part of the game, and there was just no way to do it without losing focus. Another thing that I didn't really have space to do was cover human prodigies, people who are just magicians. Like, they're not exalted, they don't have powers granted to them by the gods. They've just sort of wrested the secrets of the world away. Or people who have parents who are spirits or elementals or demons or something. All of those, they can show up in the world. They're all over the place because there's spirits everywhere. There's elementals everywhere. You can meet fair folk if you go out at night in the wrong place. And then there was just no way to do that in the book in any kind of feasible length.
One of the bizarre decisions that we made about 3/4 of the way through getting the art for Exalted was due to getting in contact with the Dreamwave people. And basically what we decided to do was that a good 3/5 of the art that had already been commissioned, and a lot of it had already come in the house, was put aside, not gotten rid of, and we certainly intend to use it at some point, but was put aside so that the main book could, instead of being maybe 80% standard World of Darkness art and 20% anime, instead go the other way with 80% total anime art and 20% being what people are more used to from the World of Darkness. It was not an easy decision, and it was not something that I think maybe people are used to from White Wolf in terms of our artists and such. Nobody outside the process is really going to know until they see this. But at one point, it was a totally different looking book, and maybe someday we even show some of the way that would have looked if we'd gone in that direction.
One of the reasons that Exalted marketing started so early and yet the game has been in development for 3 years is that we had initially intended to launch the game about a year ago. But when we heard that Wizards of the Coast was going to launch their 3rd edition of Dungeons & Dragons in August of 2000, we made the decision at that time to go ahead and delay the release of Exalted by another year. Not only has that given the game more time in the creative process and created an even stronger property, but for us it was also a business decision and a marketing decision to say, Dungeons & Dragons is relaunching. We're not sure what the quality of that product will be, but we know that it's a product that a lot of role-playing people are fans of, and they're probably going to give it a look. So let's give it some room and space, and we'll launch Exalted when it's ready. When we go to launch a game like Exalted, we look at it not only as launching this core rule book, which gives everyone an introduction to the world, but we also look at it in a very long time frame and saying, we're presenting a world. We want people out there to feel comfortable buying into this, so to speak, not just with buying the rule book, but really investing their time and creative energy in this and knowing that there's going to be a lot of support for them as this world gets built and as chronicles get told over time. So we have tremendous, looking years ahead, we know what type of support product we're going to be putting out for this, not only in game books, but in novels and lots of other areas as well.
In the world of darkness, you're generally just like a spectator to the car wreck. You know, maybe you're going to try to get some survivors out. But in Exalted, you know, you're behind the wheel. It could come out terribly, but it'll be because you did it.
Okay. Yoshikazu Yasuhiko isn't so easy to say.
No, it's not. No, it's not.